Welcome to Bits About Books, the home for conversations with authors of breakthrough books on sales, marketing, and business. Founders, entrepreneurs, and individual professionals, we all need to keep track of ideas that are helping create our today and tomorrow. Bits About Books will strive to find those books and speak to their authors, go behind the scenes and understand what inspired the authors to write the books that they did and how they went about doing so. Through our conversations, we hope to gain insights that will help us to get the most out of our efforts. I'm your host Shubhanjan Sarkar, founder of PitchLink, the next generation buyer-seller engagement platform where our mission is to make buying easy. Welcome to Bits About Books. Thank you for your time and for joining us in this session. I have a favor to ask. While you continue to listen to the podcast, please leave a comment or rating at iTunes or wherever else you get your podcasts from. I personally look at each comment and will give you a shout out to each of you in our following episodes. It means a lot to hear from you. Our guest today is Bill Price, and we speak with him about his new book, The Frictionless Organization: Deliver Great Customer Experiences with Less Effort, which he co-authored with David Jaffe.
The sad fact is most managers and even fewer executives bother to or take the time to be a customer of their own companies or of their own organizations. They have shortcuts, or they've been there a long time. They kind of know how things work. But what we do is say you need to understand from the customer's point of view and in their words what's going on. What are they saying online? What are they saying when they manage to speak to someone, a live support in a retail shop or in a contact center? What are they saying? And so we come up with a recommended taxonomy, a recommended list, if you will, in the customer's language of what the customers are saying. Like, why is my bill so high? Or I need to cancel my account. There are a lot of these questions that come up all the time.
Bill Price was Amazon's first global vice president of customer service and is the founder and president of Driva Solutions, a consultancy dedicated to creating highly effective customer contact strategies and operations. He has more than 35 years' experience advising and directing major operations in more than 160 leading companies. He is the co-author of The Frictionless Organization: Deliver Great Customer Experiences with Less Effort, and of the international bestsellers, The Best Service is No Service and Your Customer Rules. Now, on to this insightful discussion with Bill Price. Bill, welcome to Bits About Books. I'm delighted to talk about this very important book that you have written of a frictionless organization. And we have interesting experience which we just had about friction. We'll not possibly talk about it, or I'll leave it to you. You have written two remarkable books before this, and your experience about customer support, customer service is across multiple decades. Why did you feel the need to write this book?
Well, thank you for inviting me to join you for this session. I'm really looking forward to it. As you mentioned, my co-author and I have written two books together before, and they did focus mostly on, the first one focused exclusively on customer service. The second one broadened its scope to customer experience, which is beyond service. It's the whole end-to-end experience. And the third book really builds on that second book, but even goes back to the first one in that it talks about how companies and how organizations are unknowingly, unwittingly in most cases, sometimes knowingly, creating friction for their customers, which makes it hard for them to buy stuff, to use stuff, to return stuff. And so we decided that there was a need for something new, something that updated what we had done before, but also updated what other authors have been trying to do for a number of years. We aimed it at practitioners who are in the marketing, design, IT, and service worlds, but also even at the C-level executives. So they might figure out, wow, we really might be causing this friction, and friction isn't good. We know that conceptually. So that's why we thought there was a need for a new one. And just briefly on top of that, one of my good friends and a former colleague of mine from back at Amazon was walking with me during COVID, and he said, Bill, I know he's a real critic of customer service and customer experience. He keeps sending me examples, and he said, Bill, there needs to be another book. The customer expectations have risen. Companies have not kept up with that in many cases. And he said to me, you and David need to go out there and try it again, swing one more time.
That's absolutely. In fact, before we dive into your process, you'd imagine that with so much of technology,
yes,
things actually would have become better.
Yes, you would think.
But it's anything but.
That's right. It's actually complicated. We talk about that a fair amount in the book, just saying that the hope for, the promised and hope for advantages through new technologies, whether it's automated chatbots or predictive analytics, all sorts of things that have come out, and they're all individually really good. But unfortunately, many of them haven't been stitched together. And customers are not quite sure where to go or what to do. And so some of the technology has actually not been our friend. Some has been, but a lot of it hasn't been.
True, absolutely. So when this discussion happened with your friend, and I presume you came back from the walk and picked up the phone and said, "Hey, David, I think we should think of a new book." No, I'm just imagining. What
You're right,
actually?
You're right. It was actually. I fired him an email message, and we got together on Zoom that night.
So what did you discuss actually? So essentially what I'm trying to understand is, from that point till the book was written, what really was going on?
Well, quite a few things. So let me see if I can boil it down for you. What he agreed that it would be fun and a challenge to write another one together. It was in the middle of COVID. While we were largely locked down, we were still doing consulting work with our clients, all virtually. We were collecting evidence, both good and bad, of how organizations were dealing with friction. And it dawned on both of us that we kept running across other examples in secondary literature, talking to friends and so forth. And it would be timely to be able to try to bring those down into a book form again. And so what we did was we reached out to organizations that we thought were doing well. All of them wanted to interview with us. It was great to hear. To a company, to an organization, they couldn't really articulate specifically how they did it. That was our job to interpret it. Sure. But they were excited about sharing stories, which is why there are a lot of stories in the book. And then what we did is we went out to technology vendors, like we touched on a few minutes ago, and said, can you introduce us some of your best clients, the ones that you think are doing the best job with your technology? We want to talk to them. And that opened up a few more doors. And then David and I sat down and said, well, what organizations do we personally admire? And we'd like to learn more about them. So we reached out to those organizations and in many cases found a really welcome home to have an interview or two or three. And that wound up creating the overall concept of the book.
So I understand from your vantage point, it was not too difficult to get to this point, which is what you just explained. I mean, reach out to companies, reach out to vendors, reach out to organizations that you admire and so on. So that I think pretty straightforward. But that was about collecting data, collecting information. Right. When did you start actually structuring the book? When did you know that you'll have the framework and you'll have 9 chapters on the 9 points of the framework and then getting started? So that 10 chapter framework, when did you come up with that?
I would liken that to actually producing a quilt, and I'm not a quilter, but the idea is you've got different parts, you've got different colors, different shapes that you have in your mind that could come together, and we wanted to make it sequential. We want, and our other books were not quite that way. This one we thought it should be step 1, step 2, step 3, and if you think you're already at step 3 or 4, then good, you can move forward to the latter part of the book. If you want to start from scratch, then we really want to start with, well, what is the problem? How can you get your arms around the problem? How can you understand what the problem is? And so we came up with single verbs for each chapter that we thought would be alluring, appealing, attractive to the reader and to the practitioner to say, well, I'm not sure how to eliminate the problem. I think I know how to digitize it, which is the next chapter after that. But this is an interesting idea of eliminating, which is the key part of what we talk about in the book and what a lot of our clients have done and these companies said too. And then we said we need something towards the end that says, how do you keep it as a continuous process? Because a lot of organizations think that they are there, when in fact they never are there. And that's the real takeaway from a lot of these organizations, which great brand names like Uber, T-Mobile in the United States, companies that David knows and likes in Australia, other ones in Europe like E.ON, a big energy company, they all said, we're not worthy. There's still a lot to do. Our customers demand more. Technology makes it a little more complicated. Our staff turnover is fairly high. So we needed something at the end that kind of says, how do you keep this flywheel, as others call it, this flywheel going?
Did you at any point have the temptation of figuring out if this could become a 9-letter acronym and then give up on that?
David, my co-author, is very clever at 9-letter acronyms and haiku and all sorts of things, and he attempted to do that. But we and there may actually be something in it that David is still trying to conjure up. But the key thing we want to do was to make it simple, because that's sort of the subtext of the entire book. To be frictionless, you've got to be simple. You've got to remove the roadblocks, and you got to be consistently and just aggressively simple, which sounds kind of an oxymoron, but you got to be aggressively simple, because it's hard to be simple. And so we said, let's do understand, let's do assign, let's do eliminate, let's do preempt, let's do digitize, let's do learn, some of the chapters in the book.
Right. And so this framework that you have, is this something you already had, or this was something which you came up with while you were doing this book? Because, I mean, a lot of these thoughts were like your original thoughts, part of your original thought.
Yeah, we had parts of the framework already, like the core of the book that talks about eliminate, digitize, and so forth. That's been a core part of our consulting for quite a while. But the front end and the back end, I'll call it, the first 2 chapters and the last 2 chapters were ones that we actually picked up from talking to these organizations. So they were telling us, we asked questions like, how can you get that flywheel going? How can you be continuously good at this stuff? And they said, well, we've got to listen to our customers intently. And in an old Amazon term that Jeff Bezos had, we have to invent for our customers and listen to them. So then we got into, well, how do you listen? How do you learn? And we went into this whole framework with a lot of these companies of how they learn. And that created that chapter, the last chapter about learning.
Right.
And so we actually got quite a bit of good inputs from these organizations to finish out the structure.
So let's sort of dive into the book itself. Let's start with understand, because I think keeping to the simplicity part, I think that's where you need to begin. Let's talk about that a bit.
I think that's a great way to start. So the concept of understand is to figure out what is to understand what are your customers experiencing. The sad fact is most managers and even fewer executives bother to or take the time to be a customer of their own companies or of their own organizations. They have shortcuts, or they've been there a long time. They kind of know how things work. But what we do is say you need to understand from the customer's point of view and in their words what's going on. What are they saying online? What are they saying when they manage to speak to someone, a live support in a retail shop or in a contact center, or someone who comes out to do repair in their home, like field support, when they talk to that field support person? What are they saying? And so we come up with a recommended taxonomy, a recommended list, if you will, in the customer's language of what the customers are saying. Like, why is my bill so high? Or I need to cancel my account. Or maybe positively, I want to buy more stuff from you. Where can I learn more about buying stuff? Or maybe it's like, where's your closest retail store? What are your operating hours? There are a lot of these questions that come up all the time. And most organizations go way too detailed with that list, or they keep it at too high of a level, like billing issues or technical problems. So we recommend between 25 and 50 reasons in the customer's language that really follow the journey of the customer from early discovery through purchasing, through usage, and eventually retirement or moving on from the product set. So that's the first thing. And then we say and understand, you got to figure out, are these good reasons or not? And if they are good reasons, then let's get more of them. If they're not good reasons, let's eliminate them or move them to a digital channel. And then we talk about how well are you doing? So the final part of understand is how can you measure whether you're on the right path? And almost every company we interviewed that we eventually said in the book and gave as good stories, all of them had the same direction which we wanted to hear, which was the rate of contacts. The actual assisted contacts per customer or per order or per bill, the actual volume per X. And we call that CPX. And what we heard from them was, like at Uber said, we've reduced the contacts per X by 90%, contacts per rider by 90%. We talked to Cable One and they said we've reduced it by 70%. We talked to Blizzard Entertainment. They said we've also reduced it by 70 to 80% on a per gamer basis, a per customer type basis. Because if you're growing on your top line and adding more customers, that's a great thing. What you want to make sure is that the assisted contacts are going down as a rate. And so they could remain flat by volume, but if your volume is up, if your overall volume is up, that's actually a good thing because then you're actually improving. So it's really rate of motion, rate of contact. So those are the three main takeaways. Now we knew a lot about that already, but we wanted to talk about how these organizations are actually practicing it. And that's what we try to capture in the first book, and we call that Understand.
Right. So you also have this part of the structure as good stories and bad stories.
Yeah.
So good stories, I can understand. You have told me already how you reached out and how you got those stories. How did you manage to research for the bad ones?
Well, David and I have had good and bad stories for all three books. We like that concept, and when each of us is speaking at conferences or with clients, webinars and so forth, what we often ask is just huddle among yourselves and share what your best and worst experiences are. So let's say there's a group of 100 people in a traditional conference room. I was at one recently in Orlando talking about the book. And I said, just talk for a little while about your best and worst experiences. Then I want you to shout out what you've been sharing. Almost all the time, the first, second, and third shout outs are bad experiences.
Absolutely.
They're not the good ones. Partly because the good ones are frictionless in many cases. So you don't, and unless there was a recovery, most of the good experiences you kind of don't see because they're good. Now, the bad experiences, what we did there is we actually got examples from our international business partners. So we have consulting partners in 8 other countries around the world. I'm in the U.S. and David's in Australia. And so we polled them for what are some of the cases that you think are examples in your markets that are bad stories. And then we did a little bit of secondary research. I started doing a Google search every day that comes back to me every morning that talks about friction and frictionless. And so I started taking examples of the ones that come out that call friction, that actually use the word friction, like, hey, I'm encountering too much friction with your organization. And then thirdly, David and I had a few of our own mother-in-law stories that we run across, but we try to keep those very minimally. So we really talked more about what our partners were saying around the world and what we were discovering through the web.
It's time for a short break. Stay with us. After the break,
you have to listen to it first, which is part of Understand. And then you've got to figure out who's really responsible for this having happened in the first place. It's not the customer service team. It's not the retail person. It's not the tech support person that may come into your home or office to fix a problem. It happens somewhere upstream. So we really talk about in chapter 2, which is Assign, how do you figure out which team or which organization caused that to happen? And are they also the group that can actually come up with an improvement plan or an attack plan, or in this case, take the action called Eliminate?
You are listening to a Business Podcast Network original. Podcasting is the fastest growing content marketing opportunity, which is untapped. We can help you craft your audio strategy and help leverage the wide reach and easy streaming capability that the smartphone penetration provides. It is easy, it is powerful and personal. Talk to us to find out how podcasting can help you build your brand and reach out to your targets like never before. Write to us at bpn@bizcast.in. That is bpn@bizcast.in. Business Podcast Network. Podcasts end to end.
welcome back. I'm Shubhanjan Sarkar, your host for Bits About Books and founder of PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. Let's dive right back into the episode where we left it. Let us skip to eliminate as a chapter. And talk a little bit about what your advice is. I mean, you have to find first before you can eliminate.
Right. You have to listen to it first, which is part of understand.
Right.
And then you got to figure out who's really responsible for this having happened in the first place. It's not the customer service team. It's not the retail person. It's not the it's not the tech support person that may come into your home or office to fix a problem. It happens somewhere upstream. So we really talk about in chapter 2, which is assign, how do you figure out which team or which organization caused that to happen? And are they also the group that can actually come up with an improvement plan or an attack plan, or in this case, take the action called eliminate? So once that gets done, so let me give you an example. So an example would be my internet's not working in my home, and maybe even sub to that. It's my second home. I went out for the weekend, really looking forward to watching my favorite game, and the internet's gone. What can I do about it? Well, you call up, talk to a tech support person. They try to walk you through. Maybe they send a signal down the line. Maybe they ask you to reboot it, and all these things happen. Worst case is they send out a technician. That may take another day or two. You still want to watch this game. And so all this stuff goes on. All these costs build up. All this friction builds up. And yet that should be eliminated. There should be no reason why that contact happens at all. It happens a lot. But fundamentally, networks should be rugged and preemptive measures should be put in place. So one of our clients, which we talk about in the book called Wave Broadband, said, second homes out in the rural part of Washington State and Oregon and California, they get hit a lot of times by ice storms and other outages. Let's just give them a power strip. Like literally give them a $6 or $16 or $25 power strip and for free, and say, plug it into your wall, unplug your TV from the wall, plug it in the power strip, and this will reduce a significant number of those cases. In the meantime, it made sense for them to go deeper and say, well, what are the root causes beyond that? Was it network? Did we have redundancy? Did we have alerts? Could we have done something without even this happening? But in that case, it was the IT team that came up with the power strip. And then a more detailed network engineering team at Wave had to come up with, well, what are the fundamental things we had to eliminate or improve so we don't have this at all? And what we see is these companies that we talked to, whether it was T-Mobile or Blizzard Entertainment or Eon and others, said we were able to reduce like 70 to 90% of those eliminate reasons. We know they're very painful, they're very expensive. They're the most painful and most expensive. So even the pursuit of eliminate is really good. Root cause analysis, assigning the right owners, getting multiple parties involved. These are tough issues to fix, or else they would have been fixed before.
Sure. It is, I guess, not about being zero friction. It is more about how you're moving towards zero friction, I think, as an organization culture, right? Yeah,
I think so. It's aspirational. You're right.
Yeah.
But we wanted to make it categorical, so we said, how can you be frictionless? Right. Which is a point. I mean, years ago, the idea of friction was kind of confined in engineering terms. And I'm not an engineer, but there are a lot of good articles about friction and removing friction. So we really lifted that concept and said, you don't want errors, you don't want defects, you don't want friction. And every client we talk to, every company we interview said, you're right. And different organizations call it different things. So Uber calls it defects, and they call it the defect rate. And that's very powerful. That's very powerful to talk about a defect rate. Because if you have, I mean, a lot of companies search for and on the quest for like Six Sigma of perfection. And that's like 99.999 something. It's a whole bunch of nines. Yeah. But we're talking about cases where there might be 30% errors, 15% errors, 10% errors, which is not even 1 sigma.
Yeah.
And so when we rephrase the error rates or the friction in terms of the sigmas, people go, wait a minute now, how can we claim we're going to be 6 sigma when in fact our customers are telling us that we fail 10% of the time or 5% of the time or whatever it is that turns out to be the important driver.
Absolutely. What would you like to pick next to talk about?
Let's talk about redesign. Let's
Yeah.
skip right to the end and talk about
Sure.
redesign, which we found to be a lot of fun because we haven't really explored that in our previous books, but it came out in spades, as I'd like to say, with these interviews. These companies were saying, we need to reinvent what we're doing. It's sort of the Clay Christensen story from years ago about the innovator's dilemma, and other authors have written about it very successfully, which is if you don't break it, someone's going to break it for you. So even if you think you're doing well, even if you think your customer experience is near the top, high net promoter scores, high retention rates, good customer satisfaction, that sort of thing, whatever the metric might be, it is only going to go down. And someone may bring it down. So we talk in the last chapter about the origin story of Zoom. So the guy that founded Zoom was actually working at WebEx inside of Cisco, and he wanted to come up with a simpler video tool than WebEx. WebEx was very solid, the market leader at that time, but he came up with the idea of making it simpler. This is before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And his bosses, as I read about it and as I've seen interviews with him, said, well, no, there's no need for it. WebEx is working great. So what he did is he left, and he formed what became the company Zoom, which is now becoming almost its own verb. I'm going to Zoom you. Let's have another Zoom call. I've had too many Zoom calls, whatever it might be. And he wanted to make it really, really simple. And he's been successful at that. And now WebEx is trying to catch up. So is Microsoft Teams trying to catch up. So are all the other companies trying to catch up. And Zoom has had its rise and fall to some extent because of the pandemic, but they're doing really well. And they were an example of a company that where in that case WebEx did not redesign, but this guy left and created Zoom. And now he's concerned, and he talks about it publicly, who's going to come next? There's going to be another company that will wind up basically eating our lunch. So we have to make sure we continuously have to innovate. And so they listen to customers. They come up with new tools, simpler ways to do polls and surveys inside of Zoom, do recordings, have subtitles. I mean, all sorts of things that they're doing to try to continue to be relevant. And so the idea of redesign is you have to constantly rethink all the aspects of the product design, the go-to-market, the pricing, the support, and do that in a way that doesn't disrupt your current customers, but constantly improves what's going on.
Absolutely. This is a great story, and Zoom is a great story. There's no two ways about it. I somehow have a feeling that they're also walking the bloat route. So they're now getting bloated, and they're adding too many stuff and too many layers. Pricing is becoming confusing. So it was not a simple thing. Okay, go and pay $40 and you start using it. It is like too many things to choose. So I don't know. I mean, somebody is going to sort of break it down and say, okay, this is the use case I'm going to go for, and just do that. It'll be interesting to watch what happens with Zoom. It's a great story though. Yeah, absolutely. So which is your most favorite story rather the most frictionless, according to you?
I'm so glad you asked. I love that story, and I actually pick on a company there. I'll pick on a company that I didn't know very much about before we started researching the book. But David was aware of them because they're based in New Zealand, and it's a company called Xero. Xero is how it's spelled. Small business accounting software. Yeah. Think of them as the next generation of Intuit's TurboTax and Intuit software. So talk about a market leader in Intuit. Xero came up with a different plan, a different model. And what they've done is they said, part of the friction in dealing with filing your taxes and dealing with this is that if you're in the moment and you're a tax preparer or you have a small business and you're filling out your paperwork for your subcontractors or your vendors, you don't want to have to interrupt what you're doing and then have to contact someone for support. You want to make it really easy. First of all, there shouldn't be any questions, but you want to make it easy. So what they did is they came up with something called Xero Central. And Xero Central is 100% online, and it's where customers go all the time, and they go first in order to figure out what's needed. There's no inbound 800 number equivalent. There's no way to call them for support, which sounds kind of scary. But their idea was we want to populate Xero Central so it is as close as possible the 100% place you go to get an answer. If for some reason you can't get an answer at Xero Central, then you can set up what is equivalent to be like a small case. That case gets routed immediately to someone at Xero Corporation, and then an expert calls you back within 2 hours. And that expert knows where you were. So it's actually a in context conversation, not just, hey, I'm Bill, how can I help you? But rather, I see you were here, and let me see what I can do to help you. But it's an expert who may have even built that code or built that product or created the billing system. So actually someone who's very knowledgeable. And then that person says, well, did you check this on Zero Central? If the answer is yes, it didn't work. Okay, let's make sure we fix that. Or no, I didn't know it was there. Then a little bit of education occurs between the expert and the Zero customer to make sure that can be done right. They claim that they have 96 to 97% containment in Zero Central, very high customer satisfaction, very high retention rate on their subscription model. And whenever I talk about this as an example, and I've done it now recently for the last 6 months, companies go, whoa, that's really dramatic. No 800 number. I mean, we've always had 800 number. But their idea is customers find that to be friction. So let's make sure we make the online experience really work well. So we talk about it in the digitized chapter. We talk about them also in other parts of the book too.
So this is really about your first book, if you think about it.
It does go back to the first. It harkens back to that without them knowing or us coming into it. Exactly right. But they're there. The thing is, they are like the first book does. The best service is no service. Still says when you need support, it's got to be done really well and very quickly. And they do that as well. So they hit all those different. They tick all those different boxes.
Yeah, it's very, very, very good story. Yes. So let's wrap it up with your getting started chapter, where you actually are now saying how do you go about starting to implement this framework, right? Mm-hmm. So what is your advice? I mean, companies who are companies who are actually focused on customer. And by the way, I really think my day job is on the other side of this line. So it's in sales tech, right? And And we are all talking about friction of the buying process, both internal and external.
Right.
But nobody is talking about simplifying it for the buyer. It's all about simplifying it for the seller. But that's another story, another discussion, but we'll come back to you on that another day. So today, how do we get started on a frictionless organization for who are already our customers? Yeah,
the final sort of mini chapter is called Start. And we start with sample a small cross section of your contacts in one or multiple channels. Do this sort of early concept of understanding. Get a small team, a crack team that can go through that over a few weeks to really go in depth on why the customers are bothering to reach you on an assisted basis. Use this CPX formula we talk about, this contacts per X. Then we talk about bringing a cross-functional group in to examine those data. It's often incredibly illuminating. So when companies look at things like customer turnover or customer churn by issue, there may be an overall point of, well, we have 2% churn per month in our subscription service, 25% a year. Okay, what does that really mean? Well, that's just an average. So when you break down that average into what is the churn per issue, per reason in the customer's language, some of those are 10% a month, meaning you're going to lose all those customers if you keep getting those issues. Other churn data are very, very low. So do that as well. And then basically we go through a little bit further, and I'll skip down and say, do the root cause analysis on everything that you have, whether it's eliminate, digitize, because if you have a digital solution out there like Zero, why isn't it 100%? 97% is really good compared to other companies. But what's that 3%? And call that 3% failure from the sense of it failed to serve the customer. And using the Six Sigma notion, that's not a very good number to think about. So how do you do root cause analysis on each of these different elements that we talk about? And then we skip down a little bit further and say, okay, let's go down and even split out what your customer experience metrics are, which are typically averages. Our net promoter score is 47, and last year it was 45. Yay! Okay, next topic. No, in that 47, there's a lot of problem. You have deep detractors giving you 0, 1s, and 2s. On average, it's a 47 if you do the math right. But you've got some raving fans. That's great. But maybe they're not going to stay with you. And then you've got ones that are 0, 1, 2 who are likely to just go away. They probably correlate to the ones that had the bad experiences with the issues I talked about earlier. So break down all these averages in that way. And the last one we talk about, going back to the very first topic, very first mention I had with you, is have all your C-level executives go out there and get their own first-line experiences, mystery shop products, go through the self-service as a regular customer does and not on their own.
I think it makes complete sense.
Bits About Books is brought to you by PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. PitchLink makes buying easy by enabling high-quality engagement between buyers and sellers through its presentation and discussion modules. Sellers create customized sales narratives using sales collaterals and personal videos and reach out to prospects through a non-intrusive, buyer-qualified engagement. PitchLink requires no installation or download and holds the entire repository of sales collaterals and buyer-seller conversations. Talk to us to know more about how you can engage with customers without intrusion. Call us on 99021 631 32.
Bill, this was a great chat. Do you think you would like to talk about anything else that we have not touched upon? Anything upfront in your mind?
Well, I think we've covered almost all of it. I just want to go back to the positive side of it, which is if you do have issues or reasons, as we call them, that are positive for the customer and positive for you, sales opportunities, perhaps retention opportunities, then we want to make sure that organizations zero in on those, focus on those, spend a lot of time on those, and figure out how to improve the customer experience that way too. That'll raise the overall average or raise the overall experience. But it is a quest. It is aspiration. But I think we've covered a lot of great topics already.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We have a fantastic lineup over the next couple of episodes with great conversations on breakthrough books. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you do not miss a single episode. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for being with us today on Bits About Books, where we talk to authors about breakthrough books on sales, marketing, and business. We hope this conversation helped inform and motivate as we all navigate a rapidly changing business environment. For us, these are enlightening conversations enriched with knowledge and expertise. We encourage you to go out and buy the book to learn firsthand and implement some of the great ideas we discussed today. We hope to have you with us again in the next exciting episode of Bits About Books. If you liked what you heard, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts from, and give us a rating while you are at it.
This Bizcast original podcast is produced for PitchLink, the next generation buyer-seller engagement platform, where the mission is to make buying easy. Hosted by Subhanjan Sarkar and produced by Rajiv Aditya. See you next time and have a wonderful day.